By the spring of 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a brutal stalemate. The 8th Air Force's B-17 flying fortresses, flying deep into Nazi Germany without fighter escort, were being torn apart. The return leg from targets like Bremen and Wilhelmshaven became a gauntlet where German Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, fresh and fueled from nearby bases, would pounce on the vulnerable bomber boxes. Losses were catastrophic. 173 B-17s lost in just 3 months. For the crews, the statistics were personal. Half wouldn't survive the 25 missions required for a completed tour. The solution proposed by Army Air Forces planners was both ingenious and desperate. If long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang weren't yet available, they would create one from the very aircraft it needed to protect. The idea was to strip a B-17 of its very purpose, its bombs, and transform it into a gargantuan flying gunship. This heavily armed guardian would fly within the formation, its overwhelming firepower designed to shatter enemy fighter attacks and shepherd the bombers home. They called this experimental hybrid the YB-40, the Flying Destroyer. In theory, it was the ultimate escort. Douglas Aircraft Company's plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was tasked with bringing this theory to life. Engineers took standard B-17F airframes and performed a radical transformation. They removed the bomb sight in Norden Computer, sealing the bomb bay. In its place, they added a staggering array of defensive weaponry. A revolutionary Bendix chin turret with twin 50-caliber machine guns to cover the deadly frontal blind spot. A second dorsal turret behind the radio room, and replaced the single waist guns with powerful twin mounts. Cheek guns were added to the nose, and ammunition capacity was tripled to over 11,000 rounds. The result was a fortress armed with 16 heavy machine guns dripping with firepower from every angle. In early May 1943, the first of these menacing machines arrived at RAF Alconbury in England. Veteran pilots like Captain James Hartwell of the 92nd Bombardment Group were awed by the sheer destructive potential. His aircraft, 42-5738, nicknamed Hedgehog, promised to be a flying nightmare for the Luftwaffe. However, during his first taxi and engine run-up, Hartwell felt an immediate visceral difference. The controls were sluggish, the yoke heavier in his hands. The center of gravity felt off. A test pilot quietly confided that the aircraft, burdened with tons of extra guns and ammo that could never be jettisoned, climbed like a wounded buffalo. The engineer's triumph had created a fundamental and unexpected flaw. In making the perfect defender, they'd built a bomber that could no longer keep up with the very fleet it was designed to protect. The mission briefing on May 29, 1943 was clear and historic. 7 YB-40s, including Captain James Hartwell's Hedgehog, were to be embedded in the massive B-17 formation attacking the heavily defended U-boat pens at Saint-Nazaire, France. Their role was revolutionary: act as aerial artillery platforms, flying in the most vulnerable positions, low squadron, tail end Charlie, and use their colossal firepower to break up German fighter attacks. As Hartwell started the 4 Wright Cyclone engines at RAF Alconbury, the vibrations felt familiar, but the aircraft's demeanor was not. Laden with 11,275 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, Hedgehog was ponderous. The takeoff roll was longer, the climb to assembly altitude agonizingly slow. It took 48 minutes to reach 20,000 feet, nearly double the time of a standard B-17. Flying alongside the sleek, bomb-laden fortresses, the YB-40s looked like overgrown, heavily armored beetles. Yet, as they crossed the English Channel, a sense of grim confidence settled over Hartwell's crew. In the ball turret, the waist positions, and the new chin turret, gunners tracked their weapons smoothly, comforted by the unprecedented volume of fire they could bring to bear. The sky ahead was the proving ground for a multi-million-dollar gamble. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30 p.m. Almost immediately, radio chatter crackled with warnings of enemy fighters scrambling. The true test began over the target. As the bomber stream approached Saint-Nazaire, flak bursts blackened the sky. The lead B-17s opened their bomb bays and, on cue, the YB-40s provided covering fire, their multiple turrets scanning the horizons. Then came the fighters. A pair of Focke-Wulf 190s dove from 12 o'clock high, the previously lethal frontal attack. Hartwell's bombardier, now acting as the chin turret gunner, tracked the lead fighter with his remote sight and fired. A concentrated burst of .50 caliber fire met the FW-190 head-on. The German pilot, unprepared for such accurate forward defense from a bomber, veered off violently, smoke trailing from his engine. It was a resounding, textbook success. For several minutes, the YB-40's wall of steel repelled attacks. But then, the bombardiers in the lead aircraft called bombs away. The formation turned for home. Instantly, the calculus changed. The standard B-17s, now 8,000 pounds lighter, surged forward, climbing and accelerating with ease. Hartwell pushed the throttles to the firewall, but Hedgehog, still lugging all its unused ammunition, began to fall behind. The escort had become a straggler. The German pilots, sharp-eyed tacticians, noticed immediately. They broke off from the main formation and began to circle the slower lone YB-40s like wolves isolating wounded prey. The mission's primary flaw was now a deadly reality. The moment the last bomb fell from the lead B-17s over Saint-Nazaire, the mission changed. For the standard flying fortresses, jettisoning their payload meant an instantaneous transformation. 8,000 pounds of deadly cargo vanished, making them suddenly lighter, more agile, and faster. Their engines, no longer straining against the full weight, propelled them forward and upward as they entered the most dangerous phase, the turn for home. For Captain Hartwell and the other YB-40 crews, no such liberation occurred. Their deadly cargo, the thousands of 500 caliber ammunition, remained firmly locked in the fuselage. Hartwell pushed the 4 throttles to the firewall, but Hedgehog responded with a labored groan. The airspeed indicator crept to a maximum of 148 miles per hour, while the unburdened B-17s effortlessly accelerated past 160. The gap wasn't just a matter of speed, it was a chasm of tactical reality. Within minutes, the sleek silhouettes of the main formation began to shrink against the afternoon sky, drawing away toward the relative safety of the channel. The YB-40s, designed as protective shepherds, were now isolated, lumbering stragglers. Below, German fighter controllers watched the separation unfold with keen interest, directing their pilots toward the slower, richer targets left behind. On board Hedgehog, Flight Engineer Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison delivered the grim arithmetic. The extra weight and drag were crippling the engines. Cylinder head temperatures were spiking into the red, forcing him to reduce power on one engine to prevent a catastrophic failure. This, in turn, slowed them further. The fuel gauges were dropping at an alarming rate. They had burned nearly 800 gallons more than planned just to reach the target. Hartwell's intercom was filled with the tense reports of his gunners, now scanning an increasingly empty and hostile sky. The very guns that made them formidable had made them vulnerable. The German pilots, masters of opportunistic warfare, recognized the YB-40's unique profile, the extra turrets, the sealed bomb bay, and understood its fatal weakness. Instead of daring the wall of fire from a cohesive formation, they could now stalk the isolated destroyers at their leisure, attacking from multiple angles without fear of crossfire from other bombers. The innovative escort had become the primary target. The radio crackled with a call from another YB-40 also falling behind. The plan to protect the herd had backfired spectacularly. The protectors had been marked for slaughter. The German pilots, veterans of the Channel Front, needed only moments to recognize their opportunity. The lumbering YB-40s, with their distinctive second dorsal turret and lack of bomb bay doors, stood out like sore thumbs against the retreating bomber stream. Two Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 2, which had initially broken off their attack on the main formation, now circled back with predatory patience. They didn't dive into the teeth of the YB-40's guns. Instead, they hung just outside effective range, studying their prey. Hartwell, fighting the heavy controls, could only hold course. His gunners reported the shadows stalking them. The first probing attack came not from the front or the beam, but from below and behind, a vector where only the solitary ball turret gunner could engage. A burst of 20mm cannon shells ripped through Hedgehog's right wing, severing a hydraulic line. The waist gunner reported a geyser of fluid painting the window. The plane was bleeding its vital systems, and its speed bled away with them. The German tactic was clear: inflict incremental damage, force the already slow aircraft to slow further, and then swarm it once it was utterly defenseless. The YB-40's greatest strength, its weight of fire, was neutralized by its greatest weakness. It could not run, and it could not force a decisive engagement. Then the radio offered a sliver of hope. Another voice, strained with static and tension, crackled through. It was Captain Richard Hayes in another YB-40, Vengeful Virgin, also left behind and under similar harassment. Hayes proposed the desperate pact. If they could form up, they could combine their fields of fire, creating a mutually protective mini-formation. Hartwell agreed instantly. Over the next tense minutes, the two giant gunships maneuvered toward each other, their gunners covering the sky as they closed the distance. When they finally settled into a loose tandem, a combined total of 32.5 caliber machine guns pointed outward. For a brief period, it worked. The circling FW-190s kept their distance, respecting the consolidated firepower. But the Union also cemented their fate as stragglers. They were now two of the slowest aircraft over France, flying a lonely and predictable path back to the coast. Their engines, overheating and guzzling fuel, doomed any hope of catching the long-gone main force. They had traded the immediate danger of isolation for the protracted agony of a slow, exposed retreat. The trap wasn't a sudden ambush. It was a slow, inescapable equation of physics and tactics, and they were firmly caught in it. Nursing their crippled aircraft across the sky, the two YB-40s formed a lonely defensive pair over occupied France. Their combined firepower kept the opportunistic Focke-Wulf 190s at a wary distance, but it was a stalemate bought with rapidly dwindling fuel and altitude. In Hedgehog, Technical Sergeant Morrison delivered the grim calculus. They were burning fuel 40% faster than the mission brief had estimated. The overworked engines, struggling against the immense drag and weight, were pushing cylinder head temperatures deep into the red. To prevent a catastrophic seizure, Hartwell was forced to reduce power on the damaged No. 3 engine, causing their speed to decay further. The English coast was a distant promise, now over 50 miles away across the cold, gray channel. Then, a new threat emerged. High above, two specks materialized into the sleek, sharp-nosed profiles of Messerschmitt 109s. These pilots were not interested in cautious probing. They dove with intent, cannons blazing, aiming for the kill on the vulnerable stragglers. Hartwell's tail gunner, Sergeant Ray Cork, fought to track the impossibly fast targets. Cannon shells tore through Hedgehog's tail, jamming the elevator trim and sending violent shudders through the fuselage. The aircraft, already a beast to handle, became a wrestling match. Hartwell could feel the control cables straining as he fought to keep the nose level, his hands aching from the constant pressure. The flying destroyer was now a wounded whale, and the sharks were closing in for the final blow. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, a new sound cut through the radio chatter. Calm, American accents. "Bandits at 6 o'clock. We're on them." From the north, 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, returning from a fighter sweep, dove like avenging angels with their distinctive radial engines roaring. The German pilots, caught by surprise and low on fuel themselves, broke off instantly and turned for home. The relief aboard the YB-40s was palpable, but short-lived. The Thunderbolts provided a guardian screen, but they couldn't fix the laws of physics. Captain Hayes in the other YB-40 radioed in a strained voice. His No. 2 engine had seized, a propeller feathered into a dead windmill. He was going down, aiming for the nearest emergency strip at RAF Manston. Hartwell watched him peel away, a sobering sight. Hedgehog was alone again, but for the P-47s. The flight back across the channel was an agonizing crawl, every mile paid for in gallons of precious fuel and feet of lost altitude. As the white cliffs of Dover finally appeared, Hartwell faced a final crisis. His damaged hydraulic system meant the landing gear had to be cranked down manually by the exhausted flight engineer. They would land heavy, damaged, and on the very edge of their fuel reserves. The battle to return was won, but the mission had exposed a fatal truth. Captain James Hartwell's post-mission debriefing was a clinical autopsy of a failed idea. Standing before Colonel William Reed at RAF Alconbury, still reeking of cordite and sweat, he delivered the inescapable verdict: it can't keep up. The data from Hedgehog was damning. Excessive fuel consumption, chronic engine overheating, a cruising speed 15 to 20 miles per hour slower than the bombers it was supposed to protect. The aircraft had performed exactly as engineered. Its firepower was devastating, but the engineering premise was fatally flawed. A standard B-17 shed weight after the bomb run. The YB-40 did not. It remained a 68,000-pound anchor, an irresistible target for German fighters who quickly learned to ignore the main formation and hunt the straggling destroyers. Despite this, the 8th Air Force ordered more missions, hoping tactical adjustments could salvage the multi-million-dollar project. The results were uniformly disastrous. On a June 22nd raid against the synthetic rubber plant at Hulls, 11 YB-40s participated. 1 was lost to fighters and flak. The remaining 10 straggled home alone, some taking over an hour longer than the main force. Each subsequent mission reinforced the same grim pattern. The YB-40s would valiantly defend themselves and occasionally claim a German fighter, but they would always inevitably fall behind and fight a lonely, desperate battle for survival over hostile territory. By late July 1943, the statistics had spoken. Over 48 combat sorties, the YB-40s had claimed just 5 confirmed kills. More tellingly, intelligence intercepts revealed that Luftwaffe fighter chief Adolf Galland had issued a dismissive assessment. The slow, heavy gunships were not feared, but preferred as targets. They were considered easy prey. The final nail in the coffin was a mission to Kiel on July 29th. The last 2 operational YB-40s fell so far behind they required rescue by a squadron of Spitfires, and both landed at emergency fields out of fuel. The cost, $5.6 million and immense engineering effort, had produced a weapon that made its crews more vulnerable, not less. In August, General Karl Spaatz canceled the program outright. The surviving YB-40s were withdrawn and later scrapped or converted back into standard bombers. The flying destroyer was officially a historic and expensive dead end. Yet in the meticulous post-mortem conducted by engineers at Wright Field, one gleaming piece of data stood out from the wreckage of the concept. Amid all the failures, one innovation had worked flawlessly: the Bendix chin turret. In every engagement where it was used, it had decisively broken up lethal head-on attacks. The program was dead, but its most powerful organ was still very much alive. While the YB-40 program was being dismantled, Army Air Force's engineers at Wright Field pored over the combat reports with a surgeon's precision. Their goal was not to revive the dead concept, but to perform a successful organ transplant. The patient was the entire B-17 fleet. still bleeding from relentless frontal attacks. The donor was the failed flying destroyer. The data was unequivocal. In every engagement, the remotely operated Bendix chin turret had proven revolutionary. German Focke-Wulf 190 pilots, accustomed to near immunity during head-on passes, were met with a concentrated, accurate cone of .5 caliber fire they could not evade. The psychological and tactical impact was immediate. Attacks from 12 o'clock high, once the most feared, were now broken off early or avoided altogether. This single component had worked exactly as intended, unburdened by the airframe's fatal weight issues. Engineers isolated the design and, with urgent memos stamped priority, sent it to Boeing's design teams. The directive was simple: integrate this turret into the next production variant of the Flying Fortress. By September 1943, blueprints were finalized. The newly designated B-17G would carry the chin turret as standard, a direct legacy of the YB-40's brief and bloody combat trial. The innovation spread through the Allied war machine with epidemic speed. Douglas and Lockheed Vega plants, already mass-producing fortresses, retooled their assembly lines. The first B-17Gs, their sleek noses now punctuated by the twin barrels of the Bendix turret, began rolling out by the end of 1943. By early 1944, they were arriving in England by the hundreds. The effect on combat was transformative and almost instantaneous. Bomber groups transitioning to the G model reported a staggering drop in losses from frontal assaults, from rates as high as 12% to below 4%. The chin turret didn't just add guns, it closed the bomber formation's most vulnerable tactical gap. German fighter pilots interviewed after the war confirmed the change. The head-on pass, once a staple of their doctrine, became a suicidal gamble overnight. The YB-40 program, a $5.6 million failure, had yielded an innovation that would be integrated into 8,680 B-17Gs. Each of those aircraft carried not just a new piece of machinery, but a lesson written in blood and flame. True progress often comes not from a flawless success, but from understanding exactly why something failed and salvaging the one piece that worked. The YB-40 flying destroyer vanished into history as abruptly as it appeared. By the end of 1943, all 12 surviving aircraft were withdrawn from Europe. Some were ignominiously scrapped. Others were stripped of their extra guns and converted back into standard transports or trainers. Not a single complete YB-40 was preserved for posterity. In the grand narrative of the air war, the program was relegated to a footnote, a costly, embarrassing mistake that lasted just 3 months. The statistics seemed to seal its fate. 48 combat sorties, 1 aircraft lost, only 5 confirmed kills, and a price tag of $5.6 million. It was a textbook failure. Yet this failure's legacy was etched into the aluminum skin of nearly every B-17 that flew thereafter. The chin turret, born from the YB-40's desperate need to cover a fatal blind spot, became standard on the B-17G. Over 8,680 G models were built, each carrying that defining feature. Conservative 8th Air Force analysis estimated the turret reduced losses from frontal attacks by 71%. Translated into human terms, it likely saved over 2,300 bombers and more than 23,000 crewmen from death or captivity. The failed escort had gifted the bomber fleet a defensive revolution. The story of the YB-40 is not one of triumph, but of intelligent salvage. It embodies a crucial principle of wartime innovation, the courage to fail forward. Engineers at Wright Field didn't discard the entire concept in shame, they surgically extracted its one brilliant success. The staggered waistgun positions and the improved Cheyenne tailgunner station, also tested on the YB-40, were similarly adopted. The program's true legacy is a testament to pragmatic learning. While the dream of a flying destroyer died over the fields of France, its most vital organ was transplanted and thrived, becoming a cornerstone of the Flying Fortress's legendary durability. Today, when you see a restored B-17G in a museum, look at its chin. Those twin gun barrels are more than just armament. They are a monument to a different kind of heroism. Not just the courage of pilots in combat, but the wisdom of engineers and commanders who knew how to find victory hidden within a defeat. The YB-40 proved that an idea can be a tactical failure, but a strategic treasure, and that the most enduring successes are sometimes built on the foundations of spectacular flops.